Disaster Report series, which dates back to the PlayStation 2 era with Disaster Report 1 and Raw Danger, was never exactly highly respected or well loved. There was certainly a following, and I personally enjoyed them for doing something different, even if the poor little PS2 chugged when trying to render collapsing highways and tsunamis. Well, fast forward 18 years and I'm finally playing Disaster Report 4 on a PlayStation 4 Pro, and while performance issues are somehow still as ugly as ever, a sloppy frame rate is sadly the least of its problems. Let's be clear, the core of Disaster Report 4 is not in VR. The story, which will take about 9 or 10 hours to complete, gradually unlocks 5 separate VR stages at different points in the game, which will then be accessible from the main menu. So, since you're forced to play the non-VR game to get the PlayStation VR stuff, the first question that needs to be answered is the non-VR game itself worth playing? And that's unfortunately gonna be a hard no, and here's why. At first, Disaster Report 4 seems like a fun adventure game. You're exploring different locations, trying to stay safe during earthquakes as buildings and streetlights fall all around you, and even helping injured or lost survivors find their loved ones. But it's all done in the least fun way imaginable. You have a health meter, you get hungry, thirsty, and even need to use the bathroom, but none of these things ever becomes an issue, to the point where I'm not even sure why they were included. In fact, every survival element is so easy and requires such low-level monitoring, it's like they don't exist at all. But it's Disaster Report's story progression system that's the biggest offender here. You're often running around aimlessly looking for a specific person, or even worse, just anything at all that'll push the story forward. Sometimes it feels hopeless. You've run out of ideas, explored every corner, and then after throwing up your hands in frustration, you'll accidentally walk into the right place and trigger the necessary cutscene to move things along. It's incredibly tedious, and when you add insane amounts of backtracking, a boring story, and antiquated puzzle designs into the mix, after just an hour or two, you'll wonder why you're even still playing. And the answer to that, for me at least, was to unlock all the PlayStation VR levels. Each of them is a VR version of a place you saw during your adventure. A city square, a subway station, a bridge, a submerged apartment building, and an elementary school. The idea of re-experiencing these places from a new immersive perspective was initially pretty appealing, but Disaster Report fumbles its way through the VR mode here as well. You're never in control of your character. Most of what you're doing is just hitting X to say, I want to walk over here, and then your character walks on rails automatically. You can make him stop or even make him run, but that's about it. Then you'll be looking around for another button prompt to get you to a different area. There are hidden collectibles to find, but trying to explore every corner for them is when the locomotion system shows just how convoluted and unintuitive it really is. And far too much of it devolves into a point-and-click adventure, where there is no movement at all. Each stage takes around 15 to 20 minutes to complete. They're blurry, not terribly detailed, and even having huge buildings crash down around you simply doesn't have the impact that it should. Introducing full locomotion with freedom to walk anywhere you want could have made these locations at least fun to explore, but instead they're pretty unimpressive by all standards and feel like relics from the prehistoric days of VR. There's 2 pieces of Epilogue DLC for Disaster Report. Part 1 is free, and Part 2 will cost you an extra $8. Diving into Part 1 brought me back to the city 6 months after the earthquake. The city was on its way to recovery and seemingly threat-free of natural disasters, so the only thing left to do was catch up with some old friends, which means the Epilogue is making a huge assumption that these were characters you ever cared about to begin with, which, without fail, they were not. Disaster Report 4 is a mess of a game. It has its moments. It's weird and Japanese as hell, which in my book is a good thing. But the gameplay here feels more outdated than the PlayStation 2 original. And while the PSVR levels are mildly entertaining, like the story itself, they feel more like a chore to play than a game that was designed to be fun. And finally, locking the PSVR content behind a 10-hour, $60 non-VR game should henceforth be considered a crime.